Hi everybody, Codie Eash here from Pennsylvania in the Civil War. We have Rich Connon behind the camera and Jake Wynn a little further back as well. We are here on the battlefield at Chancellorsville, just about 10 miles west of Fredericksburg, Virginia. Of course, a famous action, a bloody action in early May 1863. Perhaps most famous in many circles in terms of a Pennsylvania connection for being this sort of precursor, this battle, this victory for Robert E. Lee that opens the door to what will ultimately become the Gettysburg Campaign. Just about a month later, the campaign begins and the battle is fought 2 months later. We are on a position of the battlefield that is most affiliated with the most famous, some might say most consequential, day of Chancellorsville, and that would be May 2nd, 1863. This would be the day that is capped that afternoon and evening by the famous, really by this point legendary, flank attack of Confederate General Thomas Jonathan Stonewall Jackson. To orient you to where we are, behind you as the viewer would be the elevated position referred to as Hazel Grove. That is most famous for having been the 3rd Corps position, Major General Daniel Sickles' 3rd Corps, sort of a precursor to the decision that he will make at the Peach Orchard at Gettysburg a couple of months later. This is a position that he can sort of hear, is aware of Confederate forces seemingly making their way around this end of the United States Army of the Potomac line. And then just off to your left front, my right rear, approximately 2 miles away, would be the vicinity around Wilderness Church, the 11th Corps position commanded by Major General Oliver Otis Howard. That is the ultimate position that Stonewall Jackson's flank attack will push through the Union line, caught off guard, rolling them up from their right flank back toward the Chancellorsville crossroads off to your right as the viewer. Well, at this position at Hazel Grove, in addition to the 3rd Corps of Infantry, is the 8th Pennsylvania Cavalry, a unit that is mostly made up of men from the eastern portion of the Keystone State, mustered into service in the city of Philadelphia itself. And here at this position, right along Stewart Avenue today, is the approximate route that the men of the 8th Pennsylvania Cavalry will make a rather ill-fated but rather consequential charge late on that afternoon and evening of May 2nd, 1863. These men had been in bivouac in camp at Hazel Grove itself, and they start drifting in this general direction. And we'll kind of walk here, Rich, generally following their path at about the same moment that the flank attack is successful against the Union right flank and the 11th Corps is being pushed back toward the Chancellorsville crossroads. We see the men of the 8th Pennsylvania Cavalry move along what was at that point in time just a simple farm road that would have gone through this vicinity. And as they do so, they will eventually make this charge that some would say was ordered, others would say just sort of happened, in much the same way as, let's say, the 20th Maine at Little Round Top at Gettysburg, a famous example there where historians have debated, just as veterans did, whether in fact that was a charge that was ordered. This is also a great example, and we'll read a couple of these first-hand accounts here to highlight what happened at this position, of a regimental-sized action that is described from everyone at the division level and down, and even at the corps level eventually. So just to give you a sense of the chaos that ensued in this vicinity, we'll start with Brigadier General Alfred Pleasanton. He was the division commander, eventually would command the United States Army Cavalry Corps in the Army of the Potomac just a couple of months later. And he writes this on May 18th, 1863, just after the battle. He talks about hearing heavy firing and rebel yells, and he says that an aide-de-camp of General Gouverneur Warren's of Major General Joseph Hooker's staff rode up to say the 11th Corps was falling back rapidly, and a regiment of cavalry was needed to check the movement. I immediately ordered the 8th Pennsylvania Cavalry to proceed at a gallop, attack the rebels, and check them until we could get the artillery in position. So in this case, Pleasanton says this charge was ordered to take place. He talks about it having been splendidly performed, but with heavy loss, and they do take extraordinary casualties in this action. Colonel Thomas Devon, a brigade commander, will write just about a week after the battle on May 12, 1863. He talked about the 8th Pennsylvania Cavalry being sent to the support of General Howard, and finding that line of battle broken and retired to the rear, charged upon the enemy's lines between them and a brick house. They succeeded in reaching, losing Major Peter Keenan, Captain Aerosmith, Adjutant Haddock, and 30 men and 80 horses. So heavy casualties. He says this charge had the effect of disordering and checking the enemy at this point. Their steadiness under the severe fire elicited much commendation. So we have emphasizing the loss, but emphasizing the fact that this was important in stalling, if not stopping, that Confederate advance. The regimental commander, Major Huey, I won't describe his entire account, but in addition to his official report just a week after the battle, will publish an entire book on this charge called The True History of the Charge of the 8th Pennsylvania Cavalry in 1884, going into great detail about the action by these men. And then just a couple of other interesting accounts to kind of highlight the significance of this moment. One of the rare examples of a Confederate describing undergoing this attack, the fact that he is being attacked by by the 8th Pennsylvania Cavalry from the Confederate ranks, Major John Bigelow, in a book called The Campaign of Chancellorsville, published nearly 50 years later in 1910, talks about interviewing a Confederate veteran named Randolph Barton, who said, "I have a decided impression, almost a conviction, that when Jackson's assault carried us, a rumor ran through our immediate command of a cavalry attack, and that we must look out for cavalry. This rumor had, no doubt, filtered through from the front and undoubtedly referred to the remarkable experience of the 8th Pennsylvania Cavalry under Major Huey. This encounter was most unexpected to both sides, that element of surprise." And he says, "An attack from or an encounter with cavalry in that dense country," you can see the dense woods around us, getting a sense of what this would have looked like in general at that point in time as well. He says, "It seemed as unlikely as an attack from a gunboat. But I am sure that the feeling of a possible attack after Huey's affair had impressed the enemy, and I think our men had become super sensitive on the subject." And so we're going to see, based on this, that these Confederate forces later in the day and that night would become a little bit have itchy trigger fingers, be a little trigger happy, and one might wonder whether it was with that sense in mind that the North Carolinians, 18th North Carolina, will make that fateful decision to fire into the night, shooting their own corps commander, Thomas Stonewall Jackson. The last thing that I'll mention here, talking about the significance of what happened at this site with the 8th Pennsylvania Cavalry, is none other than Major General Abner Doubleday, ultimately the first corps commander. He won't write about it in any detail in 1863, but a couple of decades later, he publishes his widely read book, Chancellorsville and Gettysburg, in 1882, and he sort of lifts the significance of what happened on this site above this battlefield into the meaning of the Civil War itself. He says, "That night there was but one way to delay Jackson. Some force must be sacrificed. And Pleasanton ordered the 8th Pennsylvania Cavalry to charge the 10,000 in front with his 400. Peter Keenan, this man who was mortally wounded in this attack, knew if he threw his little force into that seething mass of infantry, horses and men would go down on all sides. There would be few left to tell the tale. A sad smile lit up his noble countenance as he said, 'General, I will do it.' At 34 years of age, literally impaled on the bayonets of the enemy, he laid down his life and saved the army from capture and his country from unutterable degradation of the establishment of slavery in the northern states." And so here we have a moment where commanders at every level, from corps to division to brigade to regimental level in various parts of both armies, will talk about this regimental size action of the 8th Pennsylvania Cavalry. Though it doesn't save the day for the United States Army at the Potomac, it certainly stalls the intended attack of Confederate forces. And as we can see, is one of those moments that men are willing to think about the meaning of the Civil War on a larger scale, bringing it down to what they did and why they did these things on battlefields like this one. So thank you very much for tuning in. For Pennsylvania in the Civil War, I'm Codie Eash.